In this video, I'm going to use an example to illustrate how I'd like you to analyze the data you collected about yourself for the Quantify Yourself assignment. But first I want to say a few words about exporting the data from a smartphone app to Excel. If you read the assignment carefully, you know that I required people to use an app that allowed you to export the data. A lot of apps don't allow this. But assuming you've used such an app, then the data are probably exportable in one of two formats that are listed here: a CSV format, or comma separated values format, and an XML format. The CSV format files are readily and directly available, openable in Excel. You just click on them in the usual way. XML files, on the other hand, must be opened from within Excel. If you try to open the file directly, you're not going to get a file that you can analyze. Also, your data should include at least two columns: one column with the date and perhaps the time, and one column with the information you collected, although preferably you would have more than just one data series along with the time. So here's the data that we're going to use in this video. These data were collected using the MyFitnessPal app by a student over a long period of time, actually, well before the class began. The MyFitnessPal app allows you to enter in a wide variety of foods, and then it has a lot of information about them, the total number of calories, the number of calories within each of the nutritional groups, and the amount of sodium and fiber, etc. So all that information is then grouped by day and presented here. So here's our data. We have these 9 variables or so, and if I press Control down arrow, I can see there's data about 235 days. 235 days data, and we're going to focus on the number of calories eaten per day in this video. Now first, before going on, I want to say a few words about the date format variable. This is a variable that Excel actually recognizes as a date. Okay, if I highlight it like that, I can change the format. If I change it to, say, number, there's actually a number corresponding to each and every date that's written into Excel. And this is useful because it allows you to do math with dates. But for our purposes, obviously, we want it to look like a date so it makes sense to us. You can put it in different formats, so you can have it. It's a long date that includes the day of the week. You can have a short date like that. If you collect information that's time dependent, then you can have a time and a date. We're just going to go with this short date for now. Okay. Now the first thing we want to do with your data is to create a line chart to look for trends. And as in so many cases, to make life easier for us, first thing to do is create a data table. We do that by having our cursor anywhere in the data and pressing Control-T. And yes, the table has headers. They're on the top row. Press OK. You get these white and blue cells, this plaid pattern, if you will, that shows that our data are recognized as a data table. Then I'm going to create a pivot table with a Summarize with Pivot Table feature. Okay. Excel creates a new sheet, and all my variables are listed here as pivot table fields. I'm going to drag the date to the rows box, and I'm going to take the variable I want to analyze and put it in the values box. Okay. Now you can then see that in this case the statistic being calculated is sum. We're going to change this to mean or average by right-clicking, Summarize Values By, average, like that. Now, number, you can see, if I go back, doesn't change, of course, because there's only 1 calories number for each day, so it doesn't change. But if we end up grouping these dates, that's obviously going to change. So we're going to adjust it so it's average, even though it doesn't matter at first. And then I want to go over to pivot chart. I can also go to insert and find the chart that way. But within pivot table tools, I can click on pivot chart, and then I want to choose a line chart, just a simple line chart that shows the trend. Okay. And I can make this a little bigger. I have a completely meaningless key here that I'm going to delete. And so here I have calories in the y-axis and the dates in the x, and I can see it jumping around like this. It's hard to see real patterns here, other than it does seem like there was some decline in the number of calories, but it's again, it's hard to tell. When you use your data, you're going to have data over 2-week periods, so any kind of trends there might be easier to detect. In this case, I'm actually going to go over here and group these dates by month. You won't be doing this in your case because you have only 2 weeks, obviously, of data, or just under a month, so you won't be doing this. But in this case, to make the data more interpretable, I'm going to group it by months, like that. And now it makes it a little bit easier to see, and we can see that there was a trend in January. The number of calories he ate on an average basis was up around 2,300. That declined to about 2,000 in April, increased again in May, but not quite to the point where it had been, and then it remains around 2,000. So it seems like January was really, of the year, was really the high point, at least in these data. Now, of course, had he had data from, say, December of the previous year, maybe that number would have been lower, so maybe January was just a blip. It's hard when you're looking at trends. Your interpretation of the trend can be sensitive to the start and end time, right? So like here, it looks like there was some decline, which we can say, you know, there's a decline and then it's relatively stable, okay, from January. But again, if he had collected data from December of the previous year, maybe this would look like just an upward blip, and if in December he only ate about 2,000 calories a day on average. Or maybe if we had data from October, again, we have to think maybe this went up, and all of this decline is just then seems to be that it's not going to continue. But anyway, those are things you can look at a little bit. You'll have a little bit less purchase on this kind of thing because you have data from only 2 weeks, but you just have to do what you can. Then I want to give the chart a little better, more descriptive title here. And I also want to label the axes. So first I'll do the title. And I would say, in this case, it's average number of calories consumed per day. Something like that. I use the plus sign here, and I'm going to add some access titles. Call this months, and call this daily calories, something like that. I could play around with the title. It's probably better. Average daily calories consumed, something like that. Now, once I have a chart that is labeled, that where you excluded everything that's nonsensical or garbage, like that key that used to exist, then I want to put this into a Word file. So I'm going to start menu and find Word, create a blank document here, and then I can just simply Control C and Control V. Just copy and paste that chart into the Word file where you're going to have your interpretations, and you make it a little smaller if it's too big. Okay, and then here I can describe the trends that I've found. Okay, now the second thing I'd like you to do is to look at the trend or patterns, potential patterns I should say, over time in your data, but in this case to look at it by day of the week rather than simply across the whole time period. In many cases your trend chart is probably going to be just sort of up and down without a lot of patterns, but maybe it's possible that in this case, for example, you could have consumed fewer calories on the days when he was working, or perhaps not. Perhaps working days he was more stressed out, and so that caused him to eat more if the stress was driving excess eating. Okay, so how to do this, how to get the day of the week from in here, and how to look at that pattern. Well, we're going to use a bar chart, and we're going to use a special function that Excel has to extract days of the week from dates. And there's several steps, but if you follow along carefully, it shouldn't be too hard. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new variable for day of the week. So I'll just call it day of week, like that. As soon as I create a new variable, Excel knows what I'm doing. They extend this table out here. And then what we're going to do is use a function. Whenever we use a function, always press the equals sign. Okay, and in this case, this is a data table. I'm going to do this for the first row, and then Excel is going to fill it in for the rest of the data, regardless of how large the data are. So this function is called weekday. Okay, and Excel tells us this function returns a number from 1 to 7, identifying the day of the week. And so 1 would be Sunday, 2 would be Monday, etc. And then, like all functions, there's the function name, followed by open parenthesis. Okay, and then we're going to highlight that first day of the week. It'll show up like this. Shows a little differently. That's fine as long as you highlight that first day of the week. Then close parenthesis. Okay, and then I'm going to press enter. Here I get the day of the week. So 4 is a Wednesday, 5 is a Thursday, etc. So that means that, of course, January 1st, 2014 was a Wednesday. Okay. So here we have the day of the week, and we go ahead and create the bar chart, but it's kind of unfortunate because we have numbers representing day of the week, right? We don't have the actual name of the day. So it makes it kind of hard to interpret. So what we want to do is translate these numbers into days of the week. You know, for whatever reason, Excel is not giving us those days directly. They're telling us the number of the day of the week, but not the actual name of it. This is actually fairly simple to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another sheet, clicking on the plus sign here, and I'm going to create what I would call a little key, where on one column I have these numbers 1 through 7. That, and once actually you've created a couple of them, you can grab them and drag it down like this, and Excel will detect the pattern and just keep going with that. You know, I can keep going, but just want it these 7 days of the week, and then I want to put the names of these days of the week. So versus Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like that. Okay, So this is a key. 1 means Sunday, 2 means Monday, etc. And I want Excel to know that this is my this is some data I'm going to be using to translate these numbers into these names. That's what I'm really going to do. So to reiterate the goal here, I have in these data for 235 days the number representing the day of the week, but I don't want the number, I want the name of the day of the week, and I want it next to each and every one of them. And I'm going to use this as a key to do it. So first thing to do is I highlight this. This is my key, and then up here I'm going to name this. You can really name it anything. I'm just going to call it literally key. But you don't have to name it key. It just has to be, it just makes it a little easier to name it something so that I can refer to it. Okay. Then I'm going to go back here to my raw data, and I'm going to create another day of the week variable. So I'll call it day of the week 2. And this is the variable that's going to include the actual names of each day of the week. So I'm going to use a function here called VLOOKUP. Okay? And what the function is going to do is, for each day of the week here, for each number here, it's going to take that number, look it up in the key, and then provide the name of the day of the week. So like any function, I start with equal sign, and it's called VLOOKUP. Like that. That's the name of the function. Open parenthesis. The lookup value is going to be this value here. I click on it. In this case it's 4, and I want to return a Wednesday. Then comma. Then in the next argument asks for the table where we look up the information. In this case it's called key. So I'm looking up in the key. And the next argument is the number of the column of the information that I want to return, which in this case is 2, because it's in the second column. The names of the days are in the second column. And then finally, the very last argument will be false. Just indicates we want an exact match. So again, VLOOKUP is a function that, like any function, it takes a series of arguments, and those arguments are included in parentheses after the name of the function. In this case, there are 4 arguments. The first argument is the number I want to look up value. Second is where I want to look it up, which is in that key. The third value is the column of the information. Where is the information I want to return? It's in the second column. And then the final argument, which is false, it just means that it's you want an exact match. So here I press enter, and now there it is. It provides me with the days of the week, like so. Okay. You can certainly rewind the video if you need to see that again, step by step. Now that we have the days of the week, the next step is, again, we need to create that bar chart that tells us, that will give us a sense whether there's a pattern of whatever data we collected over days of the week. So I'm going to click on Table Tools and Summarize with Pivot Table. Okay. Create a new sheet. And in this case, you can actually see the new variables are not listed here. If they're not listed, you can always press refresh. So if I click over here and press refresh, and now these new variables will be listed. Kind of annoying, but if you create new variables, pivot table won't recognize them. Sometimes you have to go into this pivot table template thing and press refresh and they show up. So I'm going to take this new day of the week variable that I created, put that in the rows, like that, and then I take these data that I'm interested in this case calories, and I put that in the values box. Then I want to change the statistic being calculated from sum to average. Okay, and now some of these numbers are kind of long, hard to read, so I can use this, let's highlight them here. I can use that button to round off like that. Okay. So we have now a table that shows our average number of calories for the student in each day of the week. And then from this table, I create an easier to read chart by going to Pivot Chart from Pivot Table Tools. I should mention also that if I put the cursor outside here, all that pivot table stuff disappears, but as soon as I put my cursor back inside the table, it comes back. Pivot Table Tools menu comes back, and then I can click on Pivot Chart. In this case, I'm going to select the column chart so I'm looking for. It gives me a preview anyway. Okay. Now I'll make this a little bigger. Get rid of the useless key in this case. This kind of key thing would only be useful if you had, say, bars of different colors or something, right? So if we were looking at, you know, different carbs, protein, the different food groups, then yeah, it might be useful because you'd have multiple colors here, but we just have total number or average number of calories on each day of the week. And now I can look for patterns here. So it looks like, yeah, Sunday it was a pretty lean day, not as many calories there. Whereas on Friday, a lot of calories. So somebody's going out on Friday drinking or having a special meal, whatever. That's really letting go, then that's might be confirmed here. It's interesting. Wednesday is it's also a pretty lean day. Okay, so then I can give a descriptive title here. So I can call it the average number of calories consumed by day of the week, and we might say from January 2014 to September. No, shorten it a little bit, like that. And then I can include access titles again. Here is the average calorie take, and this would be day of the week. So, okay. Now in your case, if you collected data on only 2 weeks, then you probably, of course, only have, say, 2 Mondays, 2 Tuesdays, 2 Wednesdays. So any kinds of patterns that you see could just be due to randomness, right? Because it could happen to be that one day of the week, the number you're getting is really low, really high, and that just affects your chart dramatically. In this case, since this was based on like 9 months of data, whatever patterns we find are more likely to reflect something that's really going on. In this case, maybe binging on Friday a bit, and for whatever reason, not eating much on Monday. So again, then take this second chart, and I'm going to Control-C to copy it, and copy it, Control-V, paste it rather, into the Word document. And I just noticed that it's a spelling error, so you can modify, should be able to modify the charts from within Word as well as from within Excel. Okay. And then I would write in my description of the trend and pattern here, as well as some speculation about what's driving these patterns and trends. And that's about it.